Welcome back to Logic. My name is Tom, and today we are going to talk about cognitive dissonance. This is part of a unit at the end of this course, or towards the latter portion, where we talk about psychological dispositions and different obstacles to reasoning well, right? And so let me set up why we're talking about cognitive dissonance, and then I'll talk about what it is. So far we've been looking at different rules, logical rules that we use. We've learned what they are, and we've learned kind of how to use them in inferences, and things like modus ponens, modus tollens, and disjunctive syllogism, and so on and so forth. But when we look at the Lewis Carroll article, Carroll thinks that there's a question about how we know to use modus ponens, right? And that in fact he thinks we can raise the question of whether we need a rule to tell us to use the rule, right? So a rule to tell us when we should apply modus ponens and how to apply it, right? This kind of further conditional, given these premises, if we have these premises and the rule of modus ponens, then we can make the inference to the conclusion. And regardless of whether he's completely correct about that infinite regress, right, that continuous positing of more and more rules, what Carroll's article really shows us is that there is something of a gap between facts or premises and a conclusion, right? And even given these logical rules, there is a certain question about its implementation, right? And what this does is this opens up a space where we can consider cases in which a perfectly rational person who implicitly knows the kind of rules of inference that we have learned and knows all the relevant facts can fail to make the right inference, right? And this is where cognitive dissonance becomes a kind of an explanatory factor here of why people don't make the right kind of inference. So, the example that talk about in this module is that of smoking, right? So someone who thinks, if I smoke, then I'll probably get lung cancer or something like this, right? Let's say the person believes this. They also believe that they smoke because they know they smoke, right? But when it comes to making that modus ponens inference, they think, actually, I'm not gonna get cancer, right? If I smoke, then I'll probably get cancer. I smoke, but actually I'll be okay, right? And then you just don't, you have if A, then B, you have A, but you just don't infer B, right? And people do this all the time, right? Another example is just to keep it very light, with, I always use modus ponens in terms of a traffic light, right? If the light's red, then you must stop. The light's red, but I'm gonna just go, right? I mean, people do this all the time. They just don't make the inference. And a lot of times this has to do with a person's own beliefs. But it can also have to do with, your judgment of other people and bias in that, right? So, if someone is a drug addict, then they're likely to steal, right? My brother's a drug addict, but he wouldn't steal from me, right? Something like this. People do this all the time, and you might ask, well, why? Well, one reason people might do this is what's called cognitive dissonance, and this has to do with a kind of compartmentalization of different beliefs that we have, right? So an example here would be, let's say I have two cats and a dog, but I eat meat, right? And I think it's okay to eat animals. And they say, well, would you eat your dog? And I say, no, right? I compartmentalize those things, right? I don't see them together and try to reconcile those beliefs, right? And we do this quite frequently. And this can be the cause of something like not making the right kind of inference, right? So my beliefs say, to go back to the smoking example, my beliefs about, you know, um, the reliability of, like, the medical community in terms of their scientific research may be, that I definitely believe the medical sciences 100%. But then, my beliefs about my own, healthcare practices can be kind of viewed separately in my head, right? And this is the kind of thing that might lead to me thinking that it's okay for me to smoke, but that if someone smokes, then they're going to get, cancer, right? And I just kind of am able to separate these things. So this is one phenomenon to consider here that would prevent someone from being able to make the correct inference, even when they know what modus ponens are. They know good reasoning. They practice good reasoning in lots of areas of their life, but but when it comes, and they also have all the relevant facts, but they're just not able to make that inference in the right sort of way. So um, on the one hand, one reason for doing this is to kind of look at reasoning in real world scenarios, right? In terms of the way people actually do implement these kinds of logical rules rather than looking at them as just abstract principles. Um, but the other component here is when it comes to the persuasive paper in this course, it's one line of attack, right? It's one thing to look out for. If you are attacking or making an argument against a particular position, um, people who are advocates for that position, you might want to consider whether or not they are utilizing some kind of cognitive dissonance or suffering from some kind of cognitive dissonance that is not allowing them to see the kind of inference they ought to be making, right? So that's it for today, and we will continue to talk about more features of our psychology that contribute or take away from our ability to reason well. Okay.